Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is Culture, Humility, and Responsiveness in Behavioral Healthcare. My name is Diana Padilla, and this presentation or this 2-hour webinar training is brought to you by the Northeast Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. So this webinar is approved for 2 hours of KSAC, CPP, CPS. This is our disclaimer. This is simply saying that we are funded by SAMHSA, but they cannot check absolutely every word that we put down. What I do say is that we are funded to provide you the most cutting edge information, research-based skills interventions and competencies, opportunities. And we also are have a really nice reputation of bringing you the most current information available and making it applicable to what you do in your capacity in your setting. So the purpose of SAMHSA's Technology Transfer Center. So I mentioned that we are the Northeast Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Centers. SAMHSA is so aware of all that hard work that you folks do and the need for the way your grants require, the need for you to be able to keep your positions and your credentials and your licenses. And so SAMHSA funds us to provide you workforce support, to be able to bring you all the information and the skill sets that you, or skills building opportunities for you to promote best practices within your disciplines, whether it's substance use, mental health, prevention and treatment, and recovery supports. And these are the umbrella. It's just kind of a cute little logo that looks at the Addiction, Mental Health, and Prevention Technology Transfer Centers. One of the things I tend to really emphasize is the need to use affirming language. You know, affirming language is about putting people first. And what that really means is when we come down to it, when we look at the words that we use and when we are interacting with the folks that are coming in to access our services, we can be a little bit more intentional in the words we use. We have learned different terminology that was appropriate for when we were in school, when we started in the field. And over time, research has changed some of those terminologies. Now, it's really up to us to make a decision about really evolving the words we use and the references we use. The idea is to help people, to help really not lose sight that there's a person there with health issues that we have to address. And sometimes the language that we use can be stigmatic, and stigma is one of the biggest reasons why many people do not access care. And so we want to use recovery-oriented, stigma-free language. And so that's all to promote our best practices. And the idea here is to do it from a culturally and linguistically informed perspective, using all the best practices available to do that. Any questions so far? Great. Everyone has been typing in their full name and their organization. I really appreciate that. That's our unofficial attendance. Logistically, I believe I've given most of the information. Now, one of the things I just want to ensure, task you to do, I love when we do interactive trainings, because it really makes sense to bring in your experience into any one of these types, any one of those topics. That really starts to reflect not just the relevancy, but also the relatedness in terms of the persons that you serve, in terms of the capacity that you serve in your organization. And so the only thing about that is that sometimes the conversation gets pretty, excited, it gets robust, and we might want to oh, I can't wait to say this, and then I interject over someone. I would rather that we don't do that. I'd rather that we all kind of be focused on raising our hands so that way I don't miss anyone and our voice can be heard. Would that be okay with all of you? That's a close-ended question, only requires yes, yes nod or no nod. There you go. Thank you. All right. And then the other thing is just, I'm not sure we're going to do the breakout rooms. It depends, because this is a large group, but just as long as we can keep the interactions and keep it on the eye, that would be helpful. Please make sure to share resources like you typically do in the chat box, but also on the platform to voice it. Because a lot of times what I do is I ask you folks questions. Like, for instance, I would like to know is why are you required to take cultural competence? Why is that required by your license or credentials? Why is that? So this is for everybody. So think about that. for renewal, whether you're a SERPA, a CARC, whether you're a social worker, whether you're addiction counselor, why are you required to renew, including and include a cultural competence training? Hi, Lisa. Good morning. Please unmute.
Hi. So the way that I feel about it is if I want to be effective and help someone, I have to understand where it is that they come from and what might lead to perceptions that would be different than mine, or understand why their needs might be different, or what needs might be different.
I think that's a perfect response, especially for understanding communities and why we need to do this for the different people that we provide services to. But wait, so can I build on that if you don't mind?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so, but why do you have to do it only one time, or why do you have to do it several times for renewal?
I think that you're going to have to do it throughout in order to understand what needs come up. You're not going to get it all in one time unless you are immersed in that culture or that background yourself. And even then, it's going to have things that are individual to the person and what their cultural take or being or life might be.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks for breaking the ice and starting us off. Let me also add some of the things that we realized, some of the things that are in the chat. I continue to present with humility and compassion to address individuals where they are or who they are. Lisa, folks are agreeing with you. Check biases, required to be capable of serving the community in a culturally humble way, consistent awareness, growing knowledge, changes in policy and society. I like that one. Because I don't even think that because in our capacity, we're very focused. If we're doing direct services, we're very focused on the community. But sometimes policies and practices has a huge impact in how we do our job with the community. Yeah, and as the U.S. becoming more and more diverse, as if that were possible. Like had always been diverse, but we really, we're just kind of exploding in color, I think. And so, which is awesome. So one never arrives, it's a journey. I like that. Well, thank you, Jennifer. So for personal or professional development, a person can be more culturally informed and take these trainings on a regular basis. So I am going to add one more to all these wonderful comments that you all shared. A lot of times, and I'm going to use not just my personal professional experience when I was doing direct services, but what we have found and the research has shown is that oftentimes when we do work, we get used to certain routines and certain ways of doing practice and certain ways of speaking with people. And we're used to seeing certain common issues that present with many people. And it's not that we don't acknowledge that there's diversity in our communities, but our processes, what we do after a while looking very similar or can look very similar. And the thing about diversity and being reminded of the culturally informed practice has a lot to do with just not forgetting how to be individualized. So in really speaking to eliciting and working from and integrating the cultural perspective of the individual you're providing services to. And so when we get caught up in these, I don't think anybody here has a very, very mellow kind of job. I think most of you have a ton of different responsibilities to achieve on a daily basis. So it's easy to kind of, make sure that you're on top of all your daily responsibilities. And sometimes we get caught up in a routine, and sometimes we might miss the individuality of a particular person or some particular factor that could make a difference in how we develop the treatment plans, in how we match resources in the community to meet their needs, and so on. And so that's what a part of the reason why I believe we have to do cultural competency type of trainings for renewal is because all the folks and all the folks and services that you provide to the folks, it's easy to kind of maybe just get conditioned to certain things that you see with certain communities. And this is a nice way to kind of just keep us reminded of some of the things that we know already, but how it can be broadly applied. And so that's my job today. So thank you so much. I'm going to go back to, let me see, take that off. I also want to know, how do you learn it? how do you learn to be culturally competent or culturally informed? We can use different terms here. That nobody is really, there's no one consensus. But how do you learn that?
Good morning, buenos días. Sí, lo más importante, sorry, the most important is when you're listening to know, we have a different kind of people, patients. We have this is a multicultural country, right? So I'm from South America, for example, and we have a lot of Hispanic people, Hindu people, So, and for me, the most important is listening carefully, because culture is very, very important for each individual. I mean, sometimes we want to be accepted, but we do not accept other people. And then we have to be empathetic. To be empathetic, we need to listen in. And we avoid the bias and the stigma when you're listening carefully to each person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
And I had something, yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, Dorna. All right, I see your hand up.
I think culturally, yeah, because for me, I had an experience just recently where I never had dealt with a screened a client who was from not America. He was from Algeria. He spoke Arabic and he was Muslim. So for me, it was just another. It was I felt good about for the cultural thing to learn how to respect other people's cultures. I was kind of different for me because I never dealt with a client from that part of the world. So it was just very so I said culturally you have to respect where they're coming from. I had to listen, I had to look at where he was in terms of his religion and stuff. So it's good to know how do you work with clients who are just going to come with you out of the blue that you might not have had experience with working from a whole different background. So it was challenging, but I'm glad he came my way.
So I love that there's always such diversity to the point that it does help us to understand. And so I like what you were saying about listening, and I don't know what you were saying about different things about different people. So there's a couple of different facets that is applicable for the positions for the work that we do. It is important to understand the process, and cultural humility is part of the process and it's part of the title. And we'll talk about what that is and how that helps us elicit information, ask specific types of questions, culturally informed questions to elicit very tailored information about the individual. That's super important. And that's great for the interaction, but we don't leave it just there. It's also important to understand who are your communities? Who are your communities and who you're working with, and understand some of the trends or characteristics of the groups. And so all of the different types of information is going to help you be in position to be the best person that can help that individual with their needs. And so there's nuances and characteristics of certain trends within communities, and also an understanding what is individually important and specific about someone's perspective. When I say respect in terms of culture, I don't mean not be rude. When I say respect, and this is more because my own personal and professional philosophy has evolved from the research, is really respect this way. I acknowledge, I recognize, I integrate those cultural perspectives within practice to individualize their care to meet specifically their needs and increase the likelihood of successful outcomes. And all that is what we're going to unpack here today. So really good, really, really good comments here. I'm going to ask, let me see, where's the gentleman I just saw? Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you mind unmuting and reading this case study for us, please? Thank you. I saw that really wonderful smile, so I thought I'd put you on the spot.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Scenario of the atmosphere. A clinic serving mostly Medicaid and uninsured families is struggling to help patients keep their appointments. It's patients who come from surrounding community are often either unemployed or working minimum wage jobs. Most of the adults have at least one chronic illness, often heart disease or diabetes. Many have been touched by community violence, substance use, mental illness, incarceration in some way. Some grew up in abusive homes, witnessing or experiencing physical, emotional, or sexual violence.
Thank you for that. Thanks for reading, Mark, and thanks for being a good sport for allowing me to put you on the spot. So here you have a scenario that might be familiar to you. This doesn't mean that this is what happens in your setting, but some aspects of this may be very relevant or very fresh in your mind regarding different individuals that you've worked with. And so this is the atmosphere for a lot of places that do have communities with these different dynamics involved. Many times this is associated with high levels of stress and substance use. And so it's not something, it's not like it's something that we don't consider. A lot of times this is associated with some of the communities, the more traditionally underserved communities that we tend to provide services to. Now, let me just add a little bit of information here. So there was a survey, one of many that was done in 2022. We didn't come out completely out of the pandemic at that point, but the survey indicated that about 81% of Americans who participated in the poll were stressed out due to a variety of different things. I remember that time there were different products and different access to different things, different necessities that people were not able to get. A lot of things were on barges, things were costing a lot more money when they did get to you. And so it had had such a domino effect in so many different ways for different families. 87% of Americans are stressed due to rising inflation in the country of almost 60%. Reported that in 2021 of August and 50% in 2021 of June. And so the stress levels, and this is just for the folks who they have polled, the stress levels were really, really high. And so, and what you see, and further down, Americans fear that World War III could break out, and we're in the genesis phase of it. And so the perspectives in the society for many includes the things that are happening globally. So it's kind of hard not to think about the fact about the war between Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine, and the potential impact of that. So a lot of us now have been seeing and working with folks who were refugees or who have escaped the Ukraine and have come into this country. There's a perspective where folks here think that that can really come over here and we can be involved in a global conflict that can be astronomical. And so these concepts and these mental perspectives really increase stress and traumatize people. And so, and this is building upon what we just got out of. Right now, we're still seeing communities impacted by our experiences and having survived the pandemic. And so 65% of Americans responded that they were stressed out about money and the economy. A lot of folks still are. So what you see is the kind of the same thing that's posted on the graph. So communities have this in general. One of the things that I wanted to make mention here is that it's really important that sometimes individuals, on an individual basis, different people process information and process and deal with experiences in their life different ways. And so the mind is conditioned has may or may not be capable or have the capacity to be as its healthiest to deal with major life changes, maybe work changes, or a person who is consistently dealing with stressors in their life may be very challenged after a while to be able to deal with these changes. Sometimes we see that folks may have strained relationships or financial problems. You know, sometimes there are issues with children and family or being too busy because they're trying to, you know, make sure that the income is coming in to provide for the family. There's the other side of that where a person may be more pessimistic, which really influences their motivation to move forward. The inability to accept uncertainty, maybe not having the appropriate coping skills or healthy coping skills rather, to be able to deal with the challenges that kind of just come up in a person's life. So negative self-talk, unrealistic expectations, all of this is not something that is unfamiliar to many of us. There are people that we are providing services to that have to balance out or work or struggle back and forth with the different situations that come up in their life and how to meet those needs. So again, potentially increasing trauma and stress. And I also, when it comes to people of color, I also want to make sure, especially with the Black community, I wanted to make sure I mentioned the idea of racial trauma. And this has been noted, this is not noted in the DSM-5. I want to make that distinction. That is not, but it's such a recognized condition where race-based stress, traumatic stress or racial trauma they're interchangeable, those terms. It's an emotional, physical pain or threat physical pain stemming from racism in the form of harassment and discrimination. And these are folks that a lot of times we work with the client and we find that they need to be screened for potential PTSD, and sometimes they do have that PTSD. We don't know. We can collect the clinical data, but we don't always, we don't necessarily dive in and explore very deeply and understand that sometimes that the person that meets that PTSD clinical diagnosis is coming from, it's really coming from the things that are happening in their life, the experiences, the discrimination and the trauma that they may have experienced behind racism and such. And so research is showing that microaggressions consistently or on a regular basis for a given person can also impact the nervous system. And so we know about, in terms of trauma, in terms of like when someone was mentioning the fight-flight response in individuals in a particular context in my world yesterday. And one of the things I know about that is that when our sympathetic system is activated, when we are always on that arousal state, that alert state, when we're hyper vigilant because we feel we may be in a situation where we need to watch our back, so to speak, when we are in a situation where it may trigger past experiences, when we are in a situation where we feel we have to move forward carefully, perhaps even with trepidation, but maybe often times where some folks with trepidation. And so being at that state on a regular basis is not how our bodies were designed to work. Our fight and flight freeze response is supposed to work when it's needed, but it's not supposed to stay there on a regular basis. And that increased stress, can also be another potential impact for folks who segue into substance use or the progressiveness of their substance use. And so when it comes to racial trauma, these are often like overacts like race-based violence, vicarious trauma even, about, we don't have time to get into it too deeply, but we know it has aspects of intergenerational and historical trauma as well. And so it really impacts a lot of individuals to be in an atmosphere, be in a climate, in country, if in their communities or in their region, the impact has been against people who they identify with, which really challenges them to be able to access resources and live a healthy quality of life. So different factors for so many different things that we don't always think about. Some of the more common examples that some people do experience that we don't always take into account, that our clinical instruments do not necessarily collect data on, is the how often someone has experienced the overt racial slurs or threats made from anyone. Police harassment, being stopped, profiling is supposed to be, racial profiling is supposed to be legal, doesn't mean that it has actually stopped. Workplace discrimination too, in your work environment, many of us, even as providers, have actually gone through some of these workplace discrimination. So we don't know if this has an impact on some of the people that, some of the people who actually access services. Medical experiences that have not been up to par, medical experiences that have been more directive, but yet very unsuccessful in meeting needs. And we know how incarceration can impact different families, and deportation, someone who may feel that they're at risk of being deported. It's not just the immigration issues with folks, but also migration. Sometimes families have to move to where the money is, and how the impact of that. So a lot of different issues that can actually be foundational to why someone might need a clinical disorder criteria PTSD. One of the things some of us might be familiar with, and we know more in general, is minority stress. It refers to those high levels of stress that I was referring to. And we tend to call it minority stress because it seems to be more prevalently associated with, I'm sorry, I have that word minority. I don't like to use a quantitative reference. It's stigmatized cultural groups or communities of color. It may be caused by several factors, including poor social support, the low socioeconomic status, but minority stress really has to do also with interpersonal prejudice and discrimination. There is a collective impact of these different stresses that can affect any given individual, and it does not necessarily look the same for everyone. So here I'm going to ask, can I have a volunteer to read the scenario, the second part. So I'm just giving you some of the potential impacting issues that we don't always recognize with the communities we serve. Evelyn, hi. Could you please read this second part of the same scenario Mark read? Evelyn? You can unmute.
Sorry, I thought I was muted. I had already gone through a sentence or two. Good morning, all. Anyway.
Good morning.
Good morning. Scenario, the atmosphere. When they come to the clinic, the patients are often stressed and may become impatient. When last-minute changes or long waits occur, some patients shout out profanities, make threats, or slam doors. Perhaps anticipating this hostility, the front desk staff rarely make eye contact with patients, preferring to keep their gaze on the computer screen as they ask rapid-fire questions about health insurance and reasons for visiting. Their disengagement often creates more animosity, and patients are often even more irritated when they enter the exam room to interact with the clinicians. Thank you for allowing me to read.
Thank you, Evelyn. So Margaret, the first part, which talks about different factors that community members may be dealing with, it might be reflected in what Evelyn just read here in terms of the behavior that we see. Yet when we see this, when we look at this, and I'm intentionally keeping the slide up, so I want you to look at this and respond to my next question is, so while there are different dynamics going on, and the atmosphere is very electric, in a particular, say, a waiting room. Let's say that's the waiting room, and let's just say that that's a waiting room for a particular organization. And these are the different dynamics that are going on for folks trying to wait for their appointment. Their appointments are, their appointments, they're waiting longer than what their appointment time dictates. And they got other things going on, whether we know it or not. And so think about what the middle paragraph says in terms of when they're trying to engage and when they're trying to speak to the receptionist. And the person, they're thinking they don't want to escalate their irritability, and so they don't look at them, but they do ask a lot of questions, maybe in their own nervousness, or just to try to gather the information they need before they do meet with whoever it is that they have an appointment with. So tell me what's your thoughts, how you would handle this differently. Is it possible for you to look at this and say, okay, here's one thing we would do if it was my agency, this is what we would do differently.
Hello?
Lisa?
I think, first of all, I think it's a good habit and a good greeting when you know the moment you know somebody's name, you use them by name and make some eye contact and smile. It's that whole ability to welcome can disarm quite a bit. So I think just that whole, and I understand the rapid fire and you have to get through it, but even to say, I really want to get you into this process and do it as comfortably and fast as possible. So I know I'm rattling these things off. It's just to see if we can help you and get you through the process. And for people to know to use that language.
That's actually prefacing that and letting folks know ahead of time that that's what they're doing and why they're doing it can be helpful. Thank you for that, Lisa. Kelly, go ahead. Hi, Kelly. Good morning.
I've learned that when someone is already irritated or escalated, sometimes just simply commiserating with them for a second will go a long way. So just being like, I know this wait is crazy. We're trying as hard as we can, just sort of like reinforcing that their frustration is valid and maybe doing a little bit of simple commiserating with eye contact. I'm a very big eye contact person. And it definitely sounds like the staff needs a little bit of retraining, or maybe a lot of bit of retraining, because there is a way to do a rapid fire intake without being an asshole.
You dare say? Thank you, Kelly. Heather.
I think it would be really helpful to listen, very similar to what the last person said, just to listen to what their concerns are and actually ask about what those concerns are, to be able to connect to an individual and hear. It might be because they have another appointment. It may be because they don't understand something. It may be that just to hear whatever that stressor is and just allowing them to vent that before explaining away whatever we're doing would be really helpful in helping to de-escalate and maybe help them lower their stress level as well.
That's good. That's good. I would agree with that as well. Thank you, Heather. Paulette, please.
Hi, yes.
Hi.
So I'm agreeing with Heather and Kelly, and I would say, how about just take a pause, pause, forget about the rapid fire questions, just take a moment, meet them where they are, talk to them, and then re-engage maybe after 2 or 3 minutes. But
Mhm.
maybe that's not the time for the rapid fire questions. Maybe when you see an individual that irritated, you might just want to have a different strategy. That's all I'm saying.
I agree with everything that you all are saying. One of the things about de-escalating, and this is not a de-escalation training. The thing is, when someone is irate for a lot of different reasons, instead of prompting our own defensiveness, our own reactions, obviously their appointments, they're here for a certain appointment and they're still waiting. So, hey, they may be like, understandably upset, and it's not on them. But whether it is or not, it's still a matter about just taking a minute and giving them that moment. It says, hi, I just want to acknowledge, I'm sorry that you're so upset. What can I help you with right now? Before I collect the data, it's really about bringing it back to the person, people who are not heard, but particularly and with the diversity of our communities, a lot of what happens with them, and I got a slide on social determinants about a lot of things that happen with them is that services are not tailored to their needs. Services are not giving them the time of day. They're, hearing what they have to say, understanding where they're coming from. That is more likely to happen to a Black person, to an Indigenous person, to a Hispanic person, to an Asian person than it is to the general white community. Because that's how services have been developed for many, many, many years or decades. So the idea here is this is what, if we know this ahead of time, then we're more likely to be able, let me acknowledge, what's your name? How can I help you? Before you ask the questions, you're going to get to the questions anyway. But that's not even that. If they're complaining because their appointment's late, being culturally trained, particularly when you are aware that sometimes getting on time is very culturally specific, understanding how you respond to them when it's the agency that is kind of at fault for not being available at the appropriate time, and not understanding that there may be a lot of other things. And it was mentioned before that you don't know if they got an appointment, and it was not even that. What if they had such a hard time just getting up because diabetes is really taking a toll on them? There's certain things that are very prevalent and very common with certain communities, and it's really important to know who your communities are, but it's also important to know how to engage someone, how to engage them, how to give them that time, give them that moment, and allow them that moment. Kelly?
I guess it was something that you just said, just kind of like ticked a box. I guess what I am feeling now is that this could very easily be, if this sample scenario is in fact the way that the situations are going in some of these clinics, that's probably just reinforcing this idea that like, this is just the way that things are. This is the treatment that I deserve. It's just kind of reinforcing that vicarious disenfranchisement and, trauma that like, if I'm working with a Black patient and I am very hurried and I'm not making eye contact, that's the norm, and then that's the normal treatment, which is what they deserve based on their marginalized identity. And I think that all of us in this field, we're all in the helping profession for a reason, and I don't think we would ever want to make the norm for worse when it could be for better.
Yeah, so we're not always aware that how we behave or react to someone may be reflective of what they're used to getting in so many other different areas of their life. So thank you for that. Paulette, those who didn't get the handout, by the way, I will put it in the chat, okay? Don't worry, but that'll be for a little while. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just very quick. So I just wanted to follow up again on Kelly's point. So I agree with her. We all are trying to do our best. But I think sometimes because we come with our own biases, and if we're not checking those biases right there, it's going to come out in our actions, in our language, in our tone, everything we do. So in as much as we really want to do the best for our clients, I think sometimes we need to take a step back, particularly if we're not from that community, we do not understand that community, we do not understand the culture, what's happening. I mean, I can say, oh, I understand how you're feeling, but do I truly understand how you're feeling? So I think that's just the point I wanted to make, that we just really need to sometimes just take that step back and say, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Am I really looking at this with my lens, or am I looking at it with the right lens?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. And thank you for all the comments. And I think that's a nice segue into what I wanted to add, all these to these wonderful comments you all shared. Many times cultural trainings, and I had asked you initially about, keeping your credentials and why culturally informed trainings are required. Many times these trainings are required or mandated by the direct staff, the person who's doing direct services. Well, this is one scenario where we can understand how and why everyone in the organization should be trained, not just frontline staff. See, because if we're all working within this cultural framework, we're all more likely to be more responsive to individuals. And so that's part of that. So it's not just HR needs to be separate, board directors we need, but no, I'm everybody, because we all need to be more conditioned into using that framework or that lens to do everything through. Many of us are more into more readily adapt at say getting a new grant and rolling out the new program, and it goes this way, this is the criteria, this is the quota, these are deliverables, this is the target outcomes, and all that. And then we think about culture as something you put add on. It's like, okay, let's make sure that frontline staff is culturally informed and they get their trainings annually, because that way we keep the diverse community services going. But if everybody is not on the same page about that, if everybody's not prioritizing that, we lose so many opportunities, because everything interconnects. So the structure of the organization, the atmosphere, how colleagues work together, and how we all interact with the communities, it all intersects. So really training should be for everybody. So that receptionist, he can benefit from a culturally informed training. Say in some organizations, you have a security guard that you have to go through first before you even get to the receptionist. That person should be trained. The HR person who at some point, and I'll talk about class standards if I have time later on, who does the hiring, that person, those people, they should be trained culturally appropriately, because they have to hire. They have to know where to promote these opportunities, not just within the service in the organizations, but out in the communities. What communities? How do you make sure that everybody has an opportunity, not just a certain sect of certain selected community? So that idea is really about how broadly this applies to everybody in their capacity, whether or not they're working directly with a person from a diverse background. Yes, Dora.
And so, a lot of times, some of my clients who, they, with HASA, and a lot of times I have to spend a lot of time trying to get, talk to them, because they get so upset when they go to certain agencies and they just feel like the person maybe from another country did not listen to them. They feel that it was, they were disrespected. And you're right. I think the cultural comments should be all across the board, because they come into my office and they get so upset when they feel like they were just so disrespected by someone from another country. And maybe that person doesn't even know that they did that, but just because it's this cultural. So you're right. I think every agency should have trainings across the board, because they get very offended. They're already being stigmatized and stuff. So you walk into an office and someone with a different accent, and there's all this cultural, you're right. It should be all across the board.
It's a good reminder for us, because in our own humanness, we also get caught up in our routines and our focuses. We have certain goals that we in our capacities have to meet, and we have objectives we have to achieve on a daily basis. So it makes sense. So let me just kind of start to unpack this a little bit more. Let me go through some slides. These are great comments. Thank you. I also, the one thing I did want to do is there's also an opportunity for the organization to take a step back and say, okay, the cultural needs of these community members, which so many other issues requires, that we go back and revisit our protocols and how we do appointments, because we are keeping them waiting. So responsiveness, culturally responsive. We're talking about community, an array of different issues. When they come in and you're not there on time, or you are there on time, but you're still with the other client, or you still are in the staff meeting that's taking longer and they have to wait. Guess what? If it's not working for the communities, we need to take a step back as an agency and look back. What is our protocols? How can we do better? because we have to be responsive to their needs. It's not that they need our services and they have to wait until we're ready. That's not how it works. We're going to lose the opportunities, and people will continue to get stressed, and their mental health is going to get worse, and substance use will progress. Okay, so let me go back. So the other things that's also helpful to know, when you know your communities, who your communities are, understand what the social determinants of health are. And that's, and this is such an, this you've heard, I'm sure you've heard this so many times, but even the medical community now is actually collecting data on this, which is interesting, because I remember when my doctor first heard about the social determinants of health, he merged with a corporation and then my PCP. And I remember he asked me, he looked so stressed. And I asked him, and I told him, I think it's great that you folks are collecting data on social determinants of health. And he told me, yeah, but I'm a doctor. I'm here to heal. I'm not here to address any of that. And I said, so you can't see the relationship between how certain aspects of the person's life is going to be able to impact whether or not they adhere to your treatment recommendations. And so that kind of put it back in the conversation in a different context. This is important for all of us to know. It's not just that it's important to know the historical trauma that's been in different communities. It's important to understand the different, the current climate, how it's affecting folks. It's also important to understand how that could specifically be about these aspects of a person's domain, life domains that impacts their development. To be able to grow up in a healthy manner, to be able to have any kind of quality of life. And so social determinants of health has to do with these different life domains that have to do with, what kind of neighborhood an individual lives in. Is it a healthy neighborhood, or, because that's the ideal, is to live in a neighborhood where you can walk to, to different resources, stores, transportation, and where you have health, like healthy options that kind of remind you, like physical activity, like parks, that you're able to access, say health resources, healthcare, other social services that are very conducive for your needs. So that's the ideal. But many times social determinants of health, when it comes to communities of color, and particularly those who have high substance use rates or substance use disorders, at-risk substance use, or the substance use disorder and or co-occurring mental health disorders, a lot of these communities and a lot of these members do not have access to high quality of education, which can impact and trickle into the other aspects of their life as they continue to grow. And also the impact it can have on the children, where they go. Are there services that do provide tailored health, culturally informed health issues for a particular person? I saw there was a family member who went to the doctor and he was given a diagnosis of diabetes. And so he kind of pretty much knew that was coming because they told him he was borderline for a while. One of the first things they did, they gave him that list of foods that you have to eat. And he came home and he told me about, like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know any of this food. Like, it's not culturally informed. Think about those services that are not giving recommendations conducive for the individual. If their staple food is something different than what the general diabetes recommended foods are, then how do you bring both of them together? And so social determinants of health is starting to be such an important factor for many disciplines. If someone does not, what about the stress level behind some families whose income is not as high enough where they need to go have maybe a second job to be able to provide for the family, keep the roof over their head. I haven't been hearing in the research or even in the news about, salaries going up very quickly for a lot of folks. Everything else is going up. Gas goes up, produce goes up, everything goes up, rent is going up, everybody's getting permission to increase interest rates, but what's not going up is income opportunities for some folks. For some folks, I'm not saying this is not templated, but for some folks. So when you start to think about how these intersect, and particularly in a neighborhood that maybe not safe, that it's not the healthiest environment to grow up in, and when these social determinants come together and not in an ideal way, it can impact and increase the stress and trauma for any particular person, and can actually add to traumatic experiences. And so when we think about more disadvantaged or communities that have been traditionally underserved, we can always think about these things. So now I would like everyone to kind of consider something. You probably seen this before, but it's a good video to kind of just take in right now.
Hey, line up, everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this, a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm gonna make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
All right, any comments, any questions? Because there's a reason why I played that. Okay. Yes, a powerful message and video. So here's the thing. Just a reminder, because sometimes what happens is we don't realize that everybody, providers, communities, those challenged, those with substance use disorders and other issues, everyone has talents, everyone has skills, everyone has strengths. The issue here is that not everyone has the same opportunities. They don't all look the same. Accessibility is huge. With some communities, it's much more challenging with other communities. And then experiences influence whether someone is going to try again. And a lot of times it might speak, I'm not saying, I'm not sure, but I might speak to why we only have 2.5 million people that we provide treatment services to in any given year. And there's always 20 to 22 million people who meet the substance use disorder criteria who don't access care. There's a myriad of issues as to why for any given individual and even as communities as a whole. And so there's so many things that come together. So we have to break through that to be able to access and tailor their care. And so when I'm working with a person of color, when I'm working with a Black person, when I'm working with another Hispanic, I do make assumptions. I do try to listen and understand where they're coming from. What does that word look like so I can better use my skill set and my experience and my expertise to meet their needs very specifically as much as I can. That's the idea. And so I put information like this out here because we can be conditioned by, socialization, but that concept of socialization. So it can impact our biases. It can really trigger certain things. And so this is just a good way to keep us aware of certain things that we know, but it make it more prevalent in our minds so we can inform how we move forward, how we interact, what resources we get from somebody, where somebody may be coming from, why we want to elicit information and not be directed with them. So that is especially important. And so that's why I put this. And so, yeah, so there are some folks that are more privileged than others. Hey, not a new concept. We do know this. What happens is, though, that a lot of folks do not get the care they need. And that's the bottom line. And so I want to, and I can't unpack it too much, but I do want to make sure that we kind of go over the fact that, and be reminded that there are things that we don't always do. And it might be part of our protocols, but there are things that we don't always do. So I just wanted to do this so I'm going to bypass one of these slides. So let me go here. So diverse communities need care that meets their unique diverse needs. It's a tongue twister. So let's go to culture. Let's go to culture and something which is very often an untapped opportunity that we don't always take advantage of. So culture. So this is just one of the, this is a definition that comes from the National Center on Cultural Competence. It is one of the oldest sources of or centers of expertise on the subject matter. Many other culturally informed centers of excellence or national organizations or even local entities, have evolved from there, but this is one of the oldest, and it's still, for me, it's one of the go-to resources, and they always try to work with the research and try to work with providers and professionals and in terms of, and then use that collected information from that to inform practices. So culture is integrated patterns of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, language, practices, values, beliefs, customs, courtesies, rituals, manners of interacting, roles, relationships, even expected roles, expected gender roles that can be included in there, expected behaviors of racial, ethnic, and religious or social groups. Like all of us, if we were all, we all in the behavioral health community, and so we have our own culture in how we focus on helping folks, particularly around substance use, or how to help them around the substance use disorder. If we were all police, we'd all have a particular focus on what our goal is and how we're supposed to do our practice. If we were all in a medical community, the same thing goes on and on and on. And so for different groups, it's not just cultural groups. And there are a lot of different identities that intersect. So, but culture can impact a myriad of things. So how symptoms are expressed, for instance. So in traditional Chinese culture, they may place a value on the caregiving of an individual. So they may be protective of the person, shielding the patient from having to discuss with providers the full severity or the full extent of a particular illness, and which is different from Western medicine. Western medicine can be very direct, it's very and very accurate and very detailed. In Chinese culture, if, say, for instance, if the family is involved in terms of translation or understanding what doctors are saying, some of the information may be not conveyed as accurately or as transparently as a practitioner would really require. And so, that's because you want to, in that culture, you want to protect the individual from harm. And this is part of it. And there's more to it than that, but this is just kind of in general terms. So culture may impact something else. So what type of treatment is preferred? So for example, and so indigenous people, for older adults, they're often referred to as elders. Some of these cultural characteristics may be reflective in other cultures as well. Maybe not as specifically, but it will be reflected to a certain degree. In the indigenous people, older adults are referred to as the elders, so they play an important part in terms of advice, in terms of healers, in terms of using folk medicine approaches to address different issues. There was an individual one time in the Hispanic community that used the same thing. There were people who use Santeria or other spiritual rituals to actually address medical issues, address substance use, address mental health issues. And so in this indigenous people, the elders play a part in how to advise and how to deal with certain situations. For who provides care? Who provides care? Who is the practitioner they're asking resources from? So Asians, Blacks, and Latinx people may prefer to care for a relative at home instead of placing a family member in a nursing home. And so that might not be unheard of. That's pretty common in Western culture, that when someone gets older, you know, you would put them in a place that addresses their needs. For a lot of communities, a lot of cultural groups, it's more about, well, as a person goes older, no, we take care of them at home. We have this needs met here. If there's some clinical issues that come up, some medical issues that come up at certain times, they might have to have a quick 2 or 3 day stay at the nursing home, get stabilized, and they come right back home because we take care of our set. That kind of perspective. So that might influence the kind of decision making that an individual might, how an individual might make a decision in one way or another, depending on their own recovery and wellness process when they're in care with you. So culture has impact and influences different aspects of different people's lives. And here's another thing. I'm speaking from different perspectives. For us as providers, we've seen this cultural iceberg. We know that things that we only see. We see behaviors and we observe them, and then we think we interpret them and in what might be an obvious way. We only see 10% of what's going on. So that's the tip of the iceberg. We see behaviors, we hear what folks say. There's 90% we don't see. Before I even go into the 90% we don't see, I'm going to go back to the 10% and say, what we do see is open to interpretation, because what I see and how I interpret a behavior that I believe I see from a given individual may be interpreted different by you. But guess what? Who's the most important person is that client. That client may be reflecting certain things. If I'm not asking about it, understanding where they're coming from and why I see a particular behavior, if I make assumptions and I go to my own professional and personal interpretation, I'm using my own filters to make a judgment of that behavior, and I'm not eliciting from them. I'm not doing person-centered work. I am not using their cultural perspectives that may be influencing what I think I see. So that's with the 10%. And there's always underlying issues. What is prompting someone to behave a certain way? What is there an emotional component to what's going on? Are they grieving? Are they going through a particular difficult time right now? You know, what are their values and belief system? If I don't know anything about that, whatever interpretation I use for the 10% that I think I see can really set things in an unhealthy, unresponsive manner for my care for my patient, whether they're Black patient, Asian, indigenous, or whatever background they are, because I'm already starting with what I believe I know. And so it's important to understand who are your communities. When I think about culturally and linguistically appropriate services standards, I do class standards trainings on the side. It's really more from taking a more comprehensive approach to organizations and individual providers. And I always stress the importance of us knowing who are the members in our community. We can't go by whatever the demographics were 3 years ago. They change every year. And so who are the communities? What languages do they speak? What are the issues that we are seeing commonly amongst all of them? What are the stressors they deal with? When we think about social determinants of health, when we collect that information, we start to understand, okay, there's some certain challenges that are going to impact however it is that we're going to address the substance use disorder. So it's more of a comprehensive approach. It's not a templated approach. You know, what are the substances that are more prominent within the communities that you are working with? So being able to understand those things ahead of time is going to give you information. And so when you know that you have a community that is, say, Black and African-American community, that's not enough information. Is it the Haitian community? Are they speaking Creole? Are you talking about folks from Guyana? Are you talking about folks who are coming from South Africa? We want to know specifically who your communities are. It's not about generalizing, using the general umbrella terms. It's really specifically understand who your folks are, so that way you can better meet their needs. And then when you think about communication, we don't always know, but culture provides the overall framework. You know, it's culture, communication is more than just language. It reflects culture, it reflects perspectives, it reflects emotion, it provides the context for which certain words will mean certain things for that person. We can both use the same words in English, use the same words in Spanish, and provide and associate a different definition to it. And so the context of the conversation, the context of the other things, of the perspectives of the individual, is going to help define the words they use and what they're trying to convey. We need to elicit and listen. So I really appreciate that Ruth have first mentioned that. Language is really important, but there are cultural differences in the different models of health and illness, whether someone was born here in this country or they immigrated to the country. Even the different levels of acculturation, many folks, what they tend to do, many communities tend to do, is they keep their traditional, many of their cultural roots and perspectives and philosophies. And so those reflect in their values, in terms of their belief systems, in terms of how it influences how they engage in the world, the different goals, how they treat each other in the family. When they come into your services, they may have their own expectations. What are those expectations? Or maybe they have limited expectations because their last experience had really told them that they can't really expect much of anything, you know, that they can expect maybe bare minimum. That would be such a shame. So racism and perceptual biases, the environment impacts the individual. And so linguistic barriers, we're always noting as one of the issues that that folks run into in communication and interactions. I may speak Spanish and I speak English fairly well, I think, but do I ask my client what their preferred language is just because they can speak English, whether they speak with an accent or not? Comprehension is completely different from just speaking the same language. Communication involves the context of experiences and thoughts. And so do we at least start by asking, we're supposed to be federally mandated to do this, by the way, are we asking, what is your preferred language? Or are we just assuming just because they understand, they greet us in English, we don't have to ask that question? Something to think about. All right, so cultural responsiveness. I'm looking at the timeline. This is why I'm going through this right now. So cultural responsiveness. Many people will continue to talk about cultural competence, especially in New York. It's still cultural competency is still the term to use. A lot of places do use it, but there's a lot of different definitions about it. There are a lot of different thoughts on it. So cultural responsiveness, and a lot of the literature lately in the last few years have been speaking to this, is you know, those are the services that are respectful of and relevant to the beliefs and practices and cultural and linguistic needs of diverse communities. Thank you, Preston. And so what we want to do here is understand what those are, so that could be part of how we develop that treatment plan, of how we understand why they have a substance use disorder. What are the support systems? What are the opportunities here? What are the strengths from their cultural perspective? So that's being responsive when we integrate that in care. So let's talk about cultural humility. I'll give you that for a second. So cultural humility as a concept, it involves acknowledging oneself as a learner. So when we literally talk about that word humble, it's like humble tends to be not knowing everything. So cultural humility was coined back in 1998. And because it's specifically defined, so we are using it, it makes sense to use it. And so cultural humility, it's really about you acknowledge ourselves as learners. And if we're going to be learners, that means we have to listen to the other person. And so on the other person's perspective is other person oriented. And so humility is not being proud or arrogant, modest. It's really, so if I am not arrogant, I am less likely to say, hey, I know everything about this community. I'm Latina, so I know I can speak for Latinos. There's no such thing. So that's being arrogant. That's being arrogant, and that is going to prompt me not to ask questions. That's going to prompt me to make assumptions. That's going to prompt me to tell you what you need to meet the needs. You know, this is what I'm going to put in place for you. If you go here, this is going to help you. So the person is not even necessarily part of the process. So humility really speaks to, well, I don't know everything. Let me ask questions and let me listen to the other person, because I have my own belief system and other people have their own belief system. I can't assume that we have the same, whether or not we look the same and speak the same languages or not. That has nothing to, everybody is an individual. And so everyone has a belief system, a way of communicating, languages, certain philosophies, certain practices, certain support systems. Perhaps they have certain risk factors. It all comes together to really speak and reflect that person's culture. So understanding that those dynamics are at play, we want to use cultural humility as the process. So it's the ability for me as the provider to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other person oriented. It focuses on the other individual. So I'm here, you're here, you're there, you have experience, you have expertise, you have education, you've been doing this for a long time, you have effective outcomes with community members. You have all that under your belt. And yet, what we want to do is be able to acknowledge that you are focused on the other individual, that you're not directive with the other person, but you're listening information from the other person to understand what's going on and how it's going on in that world, so you can best understand how you can meet their needs. And so it's really, about maintaining our lifelong learning process. It begins with us as providers taking a step back, owning who we are, owning our personal philosophies, our personal belief system, whether we have, especially we have lived experience. So it's so important. And we talk like from a recovery oriented perspective as a, say, like a recovery support specialist. Lived experience is essential. It's critical to the work that you do, because that helps support the other individual in the process that they want to engage in. And that's great. But the idea here is that our lived experience, whether it's professional or personal, our experiences are our own. It doesn't dictate how the other person should address their issues. It is part of the strengths that you bring to be able to use to support the other person in that manner. So we want to reflect. I want to understand what I believe about certain things. What are my philosophies? What is it that I don't like, what I don't buy? Where are my biases? You know, what is it I'm not too familiar with, or what is it that I'm not very open about? You know, own that. I can own that. I always say all cultural trainings that I've ever done in the more than 24 years that I've been in the business, I've always requested that all of you folks own who you are. Understand that your philosophies, your personal experiences, you know, and your biases and your preferences, all of that, all of what you do, what you don't do, and how you would handle situations, how you won't handle situations, all of that is who you are. Own it. That builds your awareness. And when we build that awareness, when we consciously build that awareness, we are less likely to allow it to be part of the filter we use when we first meet somebody to interpret who they are. So that continuous self-reflection is especially important because you're in the people field. You're always working with people. So it's so important that you own who you are. Never ask you to change. You just don't want to make that as part of the process that you're going to engage that individual in. You want to make sure that services are tailored to their needs. So that's especially important. So self-reflection is key, especially with so many folks that you've been working with. Whether you've been in the field for a long time or a little bit of time, you work with a lot of folks. That's a lot of empathy. That's a lot of resource matching. That's a lot of different situations that you've had to help troubleshoot. That's a lot of support. And so we want to see where we're at, so we make sure we are not part of what their process should be. Be comfortable with not knowing. That means you do have wonderful credentials from PhD to CARC, whatever credentials you have and expertise you have, that's wonderful. Don't feel uncomfortable because you think you're supposed to, because of all this experience, all this expertise and all these years in the business, that you should know, that you should be more confident working with different individuals. No, what should be happening is acknowledge your strengths, acknowledge everything that you bring to the table. So that way you be comfortable with not knowing. That means because that's going to help you, help prompt you to ask questions, so you can use all that experience and all that knowledge to help that person very specifically to meet their needs. But it can't happen unless you elicit information from them. And so when cultural competence, the term comes out, so a lot of folks think that you're supposed to know everything about everybody. That's silly. That's very unrealistic. It's really about how you use your skill set and your knowledge to appropriately for every given individual. So there are power and privilege dynamics involved. Our, part of what we do and is be able to initiate a rapport and eventually a relationship with the individual that's really balanced out. It shouldn't be you as a provider as a higher authority, and you should be more of a partnering or collaborative individual with the other person. They are the best experts in their world. You want to elicit that information very specifically so you can be more responsive to their needs. So cultural humility as a process, we take a step back, look at what our stuff is, and keep that up front. And then we ask questions to find out what's going on with the other person, how we could best meet their needs. And so it really aligns very nicely with the TAP 21, which is pretty much, it's been out for quite a bit. The addiction counseling competencies, knowledge, skills, attitudes of professional practice, but this corresponds with what the National Center of Cultural Competence and what professionals, providers today, whether you're in New York or you're in Wyoming, as an addiction professional, you are encouraged to be able to have these different components to be more culturally informed. And so understanding there's differences between one culture and another, it's not just because we don't look alike, it's also that we think differently, we live differently. Every individual, even if we're similar to one another, there is individuality there. And so we want to value that diversity. That is really a source a strength that you want to tap into. The attitude is to be aware of your own biases, very much like cultural humility encourages. Understand, own your own value system, so that way we can also acknowledge and respect the cultural differences and the perspectives from the other person. Always helpful to understand different cultural trends. If the Black and African American community is your prominent community, and you have specific services for them, understand the different communities that are there, and be aware, be familiar with some of the characteristics of the culture, and be aware of some of the family aspects of it. Be aware of how spirituality works in that community. All the different inherent characteristics of the population, of the communities you want to be want to be familiar with. And then when you meet the person, you want to know how it may or may not be adhered to or adhered by the individual. There's also research on effective practices with different communities. You want to understand what that might be. Use your appropriate name and pronouns. I meant to do that earlier and I didn't do that. I should have said my name is Diane Padilla. Pronouns are she, her, and ella. But I do provide them on this platform. I'm always on this platform. I'm also trying to get away from conditioning myself. I want to provide she, her, and ella because those are pronouns that let someone know that I'm not making assumptions of anyone, but it also provides them an opportunity that not only can they share their pronouns when I ask them, but they can also see that I also have another language that they might be comfortable speaking. So there's different ways of doing that. It's really about culturally conducive engagement approaches. The awareness and attitude, self-reflection has a lot to do with, take time. Maybe it says each evening, but even once a week. I know a lot of times you folks come home and you're very tired and you have a family, you might have to cook or you have a commitment that evening, you're supposed to go out for dinner, special occasion, or maybe something in the yard has to be done, I don't know. But there are different things that you do when you come home. Some of us just don't come home and just crash, even though sometimes that's the best thing for you. But there are different things you can do. So take at least once in a week. I remember when I was going to school, that's what my professor had told me. She had said, if you're going to be in the people field, you may as well take at least once in a week, kind of take a step back and look back and how things ran. Were the situations that went well? What can you build upon? Were the situations where you could do better? So that's helpful. Knowledge is common challenges that present in care. What does a community tend to experience? What do we know? I spoke about, cultural characteristics of different communities you work with. Individuals would adhere to different values and belief systems that are inherent to the communities, but the individual themselves would adhere to them to different degrees. Patterns are more fluid than they are static. than they are frozen rather. And so individuals would, depending on some experiences, a person may be more likely to be less responsive to a particular culturally appropriate resource that you might suggest, and might be more apt to go in a different direction. You want to, work with what they're telling you. So person-centered approach is foundational to culturally informed practice. Skills and recognize the importance of how situations are perceived from the other person. That means we got to ask them about that. How do you see your situation? So tell me about why you came here. Tell me about your needs. So how can I help you? Even including something like, so what, after the intake and after, asking all these questions, I might even want to ask a client and say, so what is it that we haven't covered that you think about you, that you think I might need to know to best help you? Get their intake, get their feedback about things like that. There's nothing wrong with asking that. I think that's really, really a helpful question that we don't generally think about asking. So perspective highlight values within strengths and can be reframed to support recovery and wellness. And I'm thinking of here about even if someone had to felt in their substance using days, they meet the criteria of substance use disorder, they're in treatment, and even if they felt they had to deal to help, not just support the habit, but to pay the bills, to keep, the roof over their child's head, even though they were using, well, guess what? There are strengths in that. There's a resourcefulness in that. There's ways to make money that way. There is different opportunities and different ways we can look at things that can be a strength for that person, that can be reframed within the context of supporting the recovery and wellness process. So, and that's something that you start to do over time. When we engage folks, I always stress the importance of using the communication skills of ORAS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. I always encourage that. It's so important. I don't think we always get to the point of like, we know why open-ended questions are important. We don't always actually use it. Sometimes our own style of communicating with someone is so effective, and you folks are probably so good at engaging with your community because you're doing the work you're doing and you're here in this platform. But I wonder if sometimes we kind of forget the benefits of using open-ended questions. When we are consciously making an attempt to let the person have a more talking role in a conversation and us more of a listening role, if we're intentionally doing that, and if we are we using open-ended questions to help invite someone to actually be part of a conversation. These are really, really, really nice opportunities. Affirmations are great because they help an individual understand that you're present with them, you're listening to them. Reflective listening is a way to just kind of keep prompting the person to keep speaking, like you're there present with them. Some ways it's just like a bunch of reflective listening, but it's a really great way for us to kind of take advantage of the opportunity, make sure the person knows that we've been listening and we recap things. It's also a good thing for us if we have to document later. It helps us to remember a lot of that. I also want to say, okay, here, engaging. Here I want to talk about and take a couple of minutes and kind of bring up this other issue about when you engage someone, what are the things that you think are important factors to engage an individual? I'd like to hear from you. I know I've been talking a lot. I wanted to get through my content, but now I want to ask you, you're engaging the communities, you have diverse communities. What are important factors to consider when you're engaging someone? Go ahead, Paula.
I would say body language.
Okay.
Listening.
Can you elaborate?
Active listening, body language. So body language as in being attentive, showing that you are present with them and ready to listen and open discussion.
Thank you, Paula. You just gave me a visual. I just imagined that you're coming to meet me for the first time and you're in my office, you coming in and I'm in my chair, my legs crossed, I'm by the side. Yeah, hi, how are you? What can I do for you? Because I got a file. It's like, no, that's so inappropriate. And it's like, yeah, body language says, am I present? My body has to reflect the very things that I'm supposed to be saying as well. Thank you, very good. Okay, what else? May said, keep an open mind and not having a set of expectations. Okay, that's good. I want you to also tell me though, cognitively and physically, how do we create that inclusive environment within for our communities? So Paula said, okay, being mindful of your body language. What else? Oh, that's a good one. Proximity. Proximity. So real quick, Susan, before I call on Boone, I see you, Boone. Susan, could you elaborate on the proximity? Verbally? Thank you, Susan. All right, you don't want to talk. All right, how close you are to that? Well, here's what's interesting about that, because usually was something, what if, okay, you're keeping a nice distance, especially these days when a lot of us at Columbia, many of my colleagues are still keeping that 6 feet distance, just doing it. Guess it's a, it's a medical thing. So, but in general, because of our ethical and legal responsibilities, we try to keep a distance. What do we do when the individual feels comfortable and comes closer to us? That's interesting, isn't it? We've had to have classes around that. When I was doing direct services, I first got in the field, the organization had to make a stance and be very specific about how do you handle it without pushing someone away. But know that in some cultures, some folks might feel comfortable and get a little closer to you. So the idea here is, I love what you said. So we don't want to react and be offensive and be abrupt and kind of reflect that, oh, don't get too close, because we're going to lose that person. But we need to understand what the organization, the agency protocols are about, how to handle that and how to do it in a way that is respectful. Thank you. Boone.
I will definitely learn about the culture for sure, because when I was, so I work in rural Nevada, and I went to the Yamashoshone tribe. It's a Native American tribe. And I'm a person who, I don't know about any of you, I'm a very hug person. I love to hug everybody. That's how I am. I just love, physical contact. I did not know that the Yamashoshone tribe does not like that. And so I had to be educated about the culture because of the fact that you just don't hug a random person, the American. That's what I try to do. And so I didn't really understand why the tribal leader was kind of like taken aback. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to learn about the culture before I even go to these tribes. So definitely the culture for sure. That was from my experience. So.
No, thank you for saying that. Can I share with you another story that just brings it up? So there's distinctions within groups. So there's umbrella terms, American, Native, and Indians. I actually have a few friends who say, we never said we're Americans at all. So, but with indigenous people, there's distinctions within each tribe. They have their own culture, just like in every cultural group. Like I was saying with the Black and African American community, same thing with Spanish, Latinx, Asian cultures, and more and more. And so I remember one time I was, what was it? It was in one of my classes when I was back in school, and I got very friendly with the new person, and she had the Muslim garb on and everything, and she was speaking Spanish, and she was like so friendly with me and all that. And I had at first, and I went to give her my hand to shake her hand, because I've been westernized to a certain degree without thinking. This was in my early days, just in the beginning of coming into public health. And she kind of took it, and it kind of felt I could tell it was so uncomfortable for her. And I immediately asked her, I said, I apologize. And I immediately asked her why it was uncomfortable. And she was saying, she says, I may speak Spanish, I may be Latina, but my Muslim faith, I don't touch anyone. No one touches me. And so I started to say, oh, said, I acted on an assumption because of my level of acculturation, which is my own challenges where I had to start to kind of get a handle on. I went and I reacted in a Western culture because that's what they do with everybody. And it wasn't appropriate. Had she been a client, I could have lost her. She would definitely been more comfortable with someone else, working with someone else. So these are like some of the aha moments, but what we're trying to do here is not to learn in hindsight. We want to be preventive and do things ahead of time. So thank you for giving me that memory, Boone. Paulette?
Okay, so balance, because I don't like people to be close to me. I don't want to be close to them. But I feel that if a client comes close, I feel like I'm going to back up right away. And it's probably going to be off-putting. So then it becomes, am I further approachable then? Are they going to come back to me? So I'm struggling, and maybe someone can help me with this. Like, how do I balance it? So we look alike. Theoretically, we look like we could be from the same place, maybe have the same accent. But then when it comes to, they figure, oh, I'm comfortable with her. She's open. I want to work with her. I want to deal with her. And then they start to come close, and then I pull back. So I'm struggling. I'm always struggling with that. And I don't know what to do about it. So maybe you can help me there.
Before I say anything about that, I'm going to ask the folks here on this platform, how have you all worked around that? That's a really good scenario. Thank you, Paulette.
You're welcome.
So what have your agencies recommended to you, or what have you done in your own experience? And this needs a verbal response. Oh my goodness, nobody's ever gone through that yet, huh? I know you have. Go ahead. So Jennifer first, and then Paula. Jennifer?
I honestly, I talk with my hands when I speak. So I kind of think that the client maybe doesn't want to get too close because I talk with my hands. So maybe that might be an option for somebody. Or to, because I don't like people close to me either. So I try to make sure there's something in between us, whether it be a desk or just something, some sort of barrier, I guess you could call it. So that's kind of how I deal with somebody being in my personal space.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe to set it up that the first meeting is already set up for the likelihood of not being too close. Okay, that's good. Paula? Thanks, Jennifer.
I actually had an experience where one of our clients she come from like an Italian background, but she was showing appreciation and kissed me on the cheek. It caught me off guard, but I just told her after I didn't make a big scene at the moment, but I pulled her aside later and say, hey, I appreciate you acknowledging your appreciation or expressing that, but I would prefer, for you to keep some distance as far as physical distance. So yeah, and she was receptive. That's because I built a rapport with her, already. So there was a foundation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense that it kind of was received well, because you already had the rapport. Thank you. Lisa, what was your experience?
I do have a desk usually between, or part of a desk between, but and I am comfortable with close proximity in general, carrying good boundaries. But on occasion, if I know this person really needs this, I will say, you really look like you need a hug. Would that be all right? I often I work emergencies where you have families dropping off, their young addicted, kids to them young, or, any family member. And just a couple days ago, I had a mother that just crumbled. And you have to. So, well, you don't have to. But I said, you really look like, and she just grabbed a hold of me and cried for 5 minutes. To me, I'm conscious of the boundaries, and I'm very careful, but certainly sometimes I will say, hey, or if someone leans in and it's that body language, I also lean in. Usually there is something behind it. Now it's a natural thing, and I think for most people it is after they've been doing this for a while. But I think that your body language, we're always watching our body language around clients, or at least we're hopefully aware of it, but they're also watching ours. So I think that the natural part for me is to lean forward and to have a certain amount of closeness, but to still have where they're going to be comfortable, because so many other cultures people from their experiences don't want it. Or from a cultural point of view, they want that distance. So I think that it's kind of an everyday dance. I actually spent a weekend this weekend in an ashram. And I actually got to stay with monks and with a Swami where their boundaries was, and they were the most open, wonderful people in the world. You know, but at the same time, I noticed the Swami doesn't shake hands. He, you know, does the prayer of the namaste in front of it because of where they are in the religion. So it was really an interesting thing to watch just what their contact boundaries were to watch. But I think we do that and need to do that in any of our settings with people.
So thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for your comments. I'm gonna say check for everything that everyone said. So I'd like to add a little to this. And so, so in terms of the practice of cultural humility, where we look within ourselves, when we have different folks, you don't know what's gonna prompt someone to react a certain way who's not. Part of our challenge is how do we respond to that? One of the things the organization can do, take a look inside, how does the organization dictate, how does the agency recommend that we address this? You know, because there are different situations. You have, first of all, what comes into play is the ethical and legal ramifications for you. There's a representation of the program and that you're doing in your capacity. And even if someone comes at you in a moment of emotional distraught and that they reach out to you, it can later on actually have a legal ramification to it. It's happened before. So I'm going to look at it from two perspectives. So one of the things is the agency needs to kind of go to your leadership if they haven't told you already, or they don't have those protocols in place. How do we address potentially when a client or a consumer or patient is actually not just getting close to us, but actually comes to hug us or comes to touch us? What do they recommend? First, know what the ethical parameters are, okay, for you and your capacity. The other perspective is you as an individual. You may have your own preferences personally, but professionally, since we are supposed to be not reactive, but responsive to people with different cultural perspectives, it's the most natural thing in the world for some communities who feel comfortable to come in close proximity to you. Hispanic Latinos do that a lot. They even touch you on the arm a lot. They do that. I had to kind of take a step back and stop doing that because I, as a provider, cannot do that. And I had to realize that, and that's how I was raised. But you also have folks who, if someone is in a particular emotion, and they go to reach out to you, it's not appropriate for us to kind of take an abrupt step back as if they're going to give us something. Can't do that. We lose the opportunity. We have to be responsive, not reactive to them. And I'm thinking about the days where, so when folks used to get, I'm definitely going to date myself. When I was doing HIV work, and my folks, when people got HIV diagnosis, and this is before PrEP and the heart and stuff, when they got the diagnosis, they would send them to me so I can start, because I was more trauma informed in how I did things. That's before trauma informed became a thing. I was used to be able to talk through and help de-escalate emotions, but help give them the time and space and support they needed. And then there was a couple of times where somebody would start crying, and like when they share with you their diagnosis, they're going to reach out. Well, I can't push somebody away like that. That's ridiculous. I can't do that. Of course, I'm not comfortable because I don't know you. You touch me, you're very close. That's fine, but that's got nothing to do with it. Right at that moment, I'm thinking, how do I respond to this individual? So I do let myself be hugged, and then I do kind of separate, and then I give them, can we sit here? Are you comfortable in this chair? And then we separate. And there will be a time where I can come back if I have a rapport or collaboration with this individual, providing them services, where I reiterate, the opportunities, the things that the agency said. It says, I know the other day you was pretty distraught, and I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't like to say I understand. I don't like to understand because I don't understand. It's not your pain. It's not my pain. It's your pain. I don't care if it's the same situation. Your pain is yours. But I want to say, I want to be supportive. I said, yeah, I said, and I'm glad that you're feeling a little bit better. We can talk about some of the things to address. I said, some of the things I have to bring up to you is that, remember when we first met and I told you what the agency policies were and certain things, it's just so I can support you better. So my agency tells me that we have to keep a certain distance. And I said, that's just for you, for your best health. So I hope you don't mind. It really depends on how you frame it, how you present it at the time that it needs to be presented, not in the heart of the situation that they're going through, because that's the last thing you want to do. I like to say is the agency. I'd rather blame it on somebody else. It's the same thing as when you're not taking somebody's food when you're doing a home visit. You don't want to reject someone's, I made lunch for you. He said, you know what? I had something to eat just before I got here. Why don't you wrap it up and I'll take it with me? Thank you. There are different things. Run it by your agency. Make sure you know what you're doing. You don't want to push people away. There are times, this is not part of the job that people have to touch you, but you have to understand how to respond, in an appropriate, empathetic way. These days, I don't know which one of us, client, providers, whoever, I don't know who at some point didn't need a hug or some kind of touch and embrace, just considering the last 3.5 years that we just survived. So, okay, but so everything within context, understand what your agency is telling you and be more aware about where and when that's most likely to happen. I like the idea of when you first meet people and, just that arranging the environment in a certain way. There may be times where you can't help it. I remember one time when someone was leaving their job and their client found out that they were leaving the job, and they loved them so much that they went all over them and they hugged the heck out of them. And she only stood there. She couldn't do anything. She just hugged her back. She said, well, you know what? I'm glad I met you and I worked with you. Stuff happens. It's about how you respond to them. It's culturally appropriate to do that. In some cultures, it's culturally appropriate not to do that. It's culturally appropriate to keep a distance. So understand the dynamics. That's why that's why it's helpful to kind of know a little bit about the different groups that are in our world. First, look at ourselves, who we are, and then understand, okay, and then ask them questions and take advantage of the opportunity to say, so let me ask you a question. So usually, what do you tend to do in times when you're feeling depressed or when you're going through like those feelings? What do you tend to do? What helps you? And make that a conversation to provide you insights so you can better support them. That's a more culturally appropriate opportunity. So let me go here. Recovery-oriented language. And this is a really person-centered approach in how we engage folks in our work, in our capacity, whether we recovery support specialists or we are the clinical social worker, the HR person, the receptionist, the addiction counselor. We know that a lot of information comes our way with clinical terms, especially in the medical field. We have a lot of clinical information, but we're not going to use clinical information with our clients. We're going to use layman's terms. We're going to use terms and words that they understand. One of the things that would help us is understand that the language of substance and substance use and substance use disorder has changed. For more than 10 years now, the DSM-5 doesn't use substance abuse to substance dependence, and uses substance use disorder. And it takes out the stigma of language. And so it helps us to culture humility again, take a step back, look at the things we're saying that we're used to saying for a long time, what we were taught back in the day. It doesn't necessarily apply now. Now we're talking about a person who has a substance use disorder, or a person who is using substances at an at-risk level. From that perspective, it helps reinforce in our minds that we're talking about a person with health issues. And it kind of helps to do away with some of the societal attributes that has been connected to people who have substance use disorders. And so it has been connected for decades. And so it helps us as providers. So using recovery-oriented language is helpful. And so here I'm going to ask, let me see the last person, Lamar, would you mind unmuting and reading a case study out loud? Would you be okay with that?
Sure.
We only have a few minutes, so we'll do this together. So please, Lamar, could you read?
Yes. Pull it up. James is a 32-year-old African-American male who currently resides in Queens, New York with his girlfriend of 4 years and their 2 children, ages 3 and 2. James currently holds a BA in finance and was recently laid off from his job of 5 years at a local bank in March. James reports being in recovery from cocaine for the last 3 years and had been attending NA meetings several times a week until he lost his job. He reports that his girlfriend is a strong support for him in the recovery process. James currently resides in a predominantly Caucasian middle-class neighborhood and feels that his difficulty in obtaining a job has much to do with being discriminated against due to the color of his skin. James, who has a history of depression and anxiety, has decided to seek treatment after experiencing great difficulty in finding employment and beginning to feel like he might relapse. When James first arrived at your office, he stated that, "I don't think this is going to work. You wouldn't be able to understand what I'm going through."
Thank you, Lamar, and thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot.
No problem.
All right, so this is the question for everyone. James just came into the office and said this to you. And these are his issues, but this is what he said to you. What's your first step? What is it that you will do? How might you address this? So I'm looking for suggestions here. Think about a culturally responsive approach to interact with James. Validate concerns, okay. So tell me what it would sound like. Ask to sit and have a conversation first before he leaves. Okay, very good. What else? Can you please help me understand what you're feeling, what you're going through? Very good. Tell me what's on your mind. Please explain to me so we can discuss, affirm his sobriety. So it sounds like you feel alone and worried about your recovery. So here's the thing. This is all very, very, very good. Okay, I don't know what you're going through, and I do want to hear about what this has been like for you. I really appreciate that too. I would validate his concerns, certainly. That's the first thing you want to do. You have all this information that just came in a folder to you, but what you want to be able to address is what he said to you. I don't think this is going to work. You won't be able to understand what I'm going through. And somebody tells you that, I said, you can affirm what he's saying. So remember when we said open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. I can affirm what he's saying. I can easily say, you know, I may not be able to understand what you're going through. But if you give me a chance, would you mind if we talk about it? And if I can't help you, maybe I can direct you to someone who can. Is that all right? And I could bring it right back and put it back on his lap. You know, yeah, assure him that I would try and understand. And the thing is, and I would try. But I would also want to give him an option of like, if I can't, maybe I can take you to somebody who can. Would that be okay? I want to bring it back to his autonomy, bring it back to his opportunity for him to say, yeah, you know, and get him receptive to at least trying to have a conversation with me. And that gives, okay, interact body language to affirm, yes. So James, I hear what you're feeling. I appreciate you sharing with us. I may not understand, but I do want to help. So the idea here is, despite all that stuff that you got in that folder, in that intake folder, when you first meet James, it's really about what he just said to you. Because that, you know, there are things that you already know that apparently he is going through, and maybe his mental health is at stake, his potential, he's afraid for relapse, that's a hell of a strength. But it's also about, you know, what he is thinking in terms of, you know, maybe microaggressions, maybe discrimination and other things. What you want to address first, you start with initial report. I says, I may not be able to understand, but I'd like to try if it's okay with you. And if not, maybe I can direct you to someone else who can. Would you like, would that be okay with you? I want to put it back in his lap, and I want to make sure of that. So thank you. Yeah. That's exactly right, Sherry. So I know this is kind of quick, and I just want to go through a couple more slides. The idea here is no matter what experience we have, no matter what we know about the individual, what they say, you want to meet them exactly where they're at. at that moment. That's going to help me understand. If I can build a rapport with James, it's going to help me understand later all these other issues of why he believes like he can't get a job because he's been discriminated against. So what is there some kind of racial trauma going on here? Is that part of the world? Is that part of what might be a potential risk for him to use substances again? We already know that there's vulnerability there or risk factors of mental health issues. So all of this is helpful to help me start to understand, you know, where this may go. So I have a lot that I can unpack and ask questions about, you know, but first I have to get through what I may not be able to understand. And I'm very clear on that. So thanks everybody for those great suggestions. I want to mention here one last thing. You know, sometimes when we don't know what kind of culturally informed questions, you know, the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual on Mental Health Disorders, which is the criteria that we all use to diagnose substance use or any substance-related disorder, also includes a cultural formulation interview. It has 5 components in it. What it has is very specifically written culturally informed questions that we might browse through and maybe include 1 or 2 when we are doing our own data gathering with the individual. And so it does inquire about what they believe is their problem, the context and some mitigating factors. It elicits the cultural information from that individual. And it helps to give you insight and inform how you will be able, not just to inform the assessment, but what kind of potential next steps you can take with them, what kind of supports you can provide. And so this is very helpful. It might be something to look at. The class standards for behavioral health, this is the culturally and linguistically appropriate services. I do trainings on that. That is 15 actionable steps that the Office of Minority Health had developed to help organizations and providers understand how they can look inside to see what's working in their organization and where they can use some enhancements to be more culturally informed and culturally and linguistically informed. And the idea is that that it looks at different parts. It looks at the organization. The organization is encouraged to look at the protocols, the practices, all the way from the top to the front, you know, and it also looks at communication and language assistance. And it really encompasses on how we as providers engage community and provide them services. And then it has another component about how we can engage in these activities and keep and be able to do the enhancements that we may want to do. And so they're here, they're in your slides. It's really about understanding how that culture impacts everybody's capacity, from that board member to the executive director who may not be doing direct services, but having a cultural framework is really important, just as important as it is for the recovery specialists and the addiction professionals that are here. So these are some different resources that I have. This is an especially helpful one. Building Health Equity and Inclusion. These are free resources. These are these are informational podcasts and webinars that also provide handouts and different tools that you might be interested in if you're leadership and you wanted to really build diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in your setting. Belonging has to do with the atmosphere that we can create, not just for communities, diverse communities served, but also for creating a supportive environment for the provider, for the person working with the communities. So this is a nice site to get to. So these are really, really good comments, and I've really enjoyed my time here with you. That's why I'm not asking for any more questions, but I'm definitely saving this chat. I think this is really great. And hopefully we'll see you again at the next training. And thank you all for participating. This has been really, really nice. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.